Well, welcome to Currituck Resource Center. We are talking about the 10 signs of depression. This is the second video in the series, and last video we actually talked about 4 different principles that we can really help others with, and so that video is posted as well, and that's actually the first of the series. So we're actually going to start talking tonight about the 10 signs of depression, and we have these things set up to where there's a couple thoughts that we'll talk about on each item, and then there's a see and hear. If you have the booklet, you can download that as well. There's a see and hear. Now, the reason we do the see and hear is because there are things that a lot of times we need to become involved with as we work with other individuals and as we share life with other individuals. So whether we're a caregiver in some way, or whether this is just a family member or a friend, there's opportunities that we need to have in order to be able to learn to help and listen with others. And so it's very important that we look at the practical sides of things, and so that's the reason that we have the see and hear as well. So the first time we're going to talk about in this series of videos is actually sadness. Now, most of us experience sadness in some way, shape, or form. It's just a natural part of life. What we're talking about tonight is this constant and overwhelming sadness. Now, I know some people have asked me before, what length of time, how long would that be? If a person is sad 1, 2, 3 days, week, or whatever, and I don't know that there's any real set time that we can put, but there is a clock in our minds, I think, that we should be aware of. And so in other words, it's very, very important for us to begin to understand when we're helping others, or if it's ourselves who are in sadness for an extended period of time. We need to be able to somehow identify maybe a situation or a problem or an experience that we went through. And so what we're talking about tonight is this long period of overwhelming sadness that is really fairly common. In fact, I started with sadness because sadness is actually something that is the very beginning of depression, and a lot of times it's an experience that happens in our lives: a loss of life, loss of someone close to us, a traumatic event in some way that is really a part of what is or leads to sadness. And so it just really, sadness is this hopelessness, this sense of hopelessness that really makes it difficult to just enjoy life and to be a part of life and be a part of what is happening in the world around us. And so just want to remind you that this is an extended period of sadness. So if you have a friend or a family member, someone who has experienced a traumatic event or a loss in their life, that's a lot of times that's a good time to say this is when the clock starts, so that we're not caught about it. One of the things that another thing, for example, that might be an issue that can bring on depression and sadness is actually some sort of postpartum depression. A woman has a child, and for whatever reason, whether it's a chemical or whether there's some other imbalance in her life, and so that would be another event that you could take note of. So after the baby was born, is there an extended period of sadness? And so it's important for us to start that time clock, so to speak, if we're going to care for friends, or even if we can identify it in ourselves. So now let's go to the see and hear, because these are points that help us identify. So we've set the clock, we've set the beginning of this possible sadness or times, and so now we want to look at some things that you and I can be aware of when we are wanting to help someone else who may be in sadness, or maybe things that can click within us a lot of times, because we talked in the last video, we talked about reviewing conversation is an important part of this obstacle in depression that we talk about. And so when we look at that in general, sometimes our self-talk is very important to help us understand where we're at. So in the see and hear section, let's just look at the first one. Minor inconveniences that seem like enormous things, where something is constantly blown out of proportion, where something is exaggerated to the point and that you can't really understand why the person is saying or doing those kinds of things. Those would be something to look at, where this little happening that likely, and this is why it's good to review, if you're a friend or family member, whoever that is, it's a good time to review how they might have handled something similar in the past. And so now, why are they blowing things up in this little thing? And so it's a good idea, and you can look at those questions and ask questions that we talked about in the last video. That kind of goes along with the second one that we're talking about, because in this process, there may be something that you have saw a friend or family member, whoever it is, go through, and they've handled it with flying colors. It seemed like, man, this sad thing, this catastrophe, this tragic event that happened, and boy, they didn't seem like they had any problem dealing with it. Or maybe it's yourself. I didn't have any problem dealing with this, and now something similar happens, and all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed and out of shape. And so those things are things that we need to look at. Feelings that get in the way of previous meaningful activities. This is a bit more touchy when we get to, or sensitive, I should say, when we get to this type of thing. Because in this scenario, you are beginning to watch individuals who may have an experience of some sort, and they're really struggling to whether they even want to go to it, or whether they even want to be a part of it in some way, or an activity that they used to enjoy. Maybe it's a sport they used to enjoy, and they would do it, at any time. They would drop everything and go enjoy this sport, and now there's no interest in it whatsoever. Those kinds of things. What are those activities that an individual really enjoyed, but now they question, or they hesitate to go, or they say they don't have time to do it anymore? Those kinds of things. And of course, if they say they don't have time to do it, we'll talk in later videos about some of the things that they will say and some of the other things that they will show in order to understand that. Overwhelming feelings of self-worthlessness and hopelessness. It's really amazing sometimes how sadness can lead to so many different things, but an extended period of sadness really allows you to go into a simple conversation with yourself about how hopeless the situation is. And this is not just a critical person, or a discouraged person, or a disappointed or pessimistic. You can usually determine a pessimistic person who always, looks at the glass half empty, always, everything seems to go wrong, or nothing seems to be done right for that person. We know that they have that kind of lifestyle. But when we're talking about a person who has sadness, we're talking about a change in something. So they used to be able to deal with these things, or they used to do these things, and now all of a sudden, after this event or whatever reason, sometimes job situations can challenge this sadness as well. Maybe a job didn't go the way they wanted, or the pay raise didn't come, or something like that, and sometimes we don't want to share about that, but the reality is we need to be able to share. And then, of course, one of the last things that we want to just mention in this area of sadness is critical of others in similar life situations. We always tend to, a lot of times, want to put other people down to make ourselves feel better. And so a lot of times in this area of sadness, we can mask our own feelings and mask our own sadness, as it were, by pointing out things in others that are similar to what I'm going through. And so if you see someone who was not overly critical, or used to see the good side in things, and now there's this specific change that you see, then it's an opportunity for us to engage in some conversation to really help the person. With sadness, as well as all of these 10 signs, but particularly with sadness, because if we can deal with this, we can really head off a lot of things when it comes to depression. But particularly with sadness, it really helps to have just an open and honest conversation with somebody and be willing to walk through the depths of that sadness. Sometimes even with smaller situations or smaller life circumstances, a person can become sad, and they don't need someone to tell them they should just get over it, or they should just move on, or that was no big deal. They need to feel some sort of empathy or some sort of caring along with it, and so that's a conversation that can be happened. And a lot of times it starts with a conversation, and then it continues with the follow-up that you can do over a period of time. And you literally, as a friend, as a sibling, as some sort of family member, a co-worker, you can literally bring joy and encouragement into someone's life if you're willing to walk through the depth of sadness with them. So I hope this helps some. And as we go on with the 10 signs of depression, the sadness is certainly one of those areas that is key. So we thank you for checking out Courage Talk Resource Center, and we look forward to helping more in the days to come.